Hello, I'm Sensei Alex Kakio. Thank you for joining me this evening for Dharma Sunday, where we take canonical Buddhist teachings and tie them with daily life. The title of today's talk is Race and Politics in the Buddhist Sangha. Before we get into that, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way you'll be notified when I post talks in the future. If you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, that'd be great too. So, there are some discussions, some debates that have literally gone on since the beginning of Buddhism 2,600 years ago. Is enlightenment attained, or is it realized as a part of who we are inherently? Is nirvana the ending of the cycle of samsara, or is nirvana inner peace? These are things that, depending on the sect and school of Buddhism you practice with, you probably have strong opinions about. Whether politics belongs in our Buddhist discussions is another one of those debates. If we look at the writings of Shinran, if we look at the writings of Dogen, if we look at the life experiences of the Buddha himself, this concept of does Buddhism need to exist as separate and pure, separate from the world and the messiness that come along with politics, or is it Buddhism so entrenched in the world that politics needs to be part of our spiritual practice? So I recently read an article by scholar practitioner Anne Gleig, and she gave some of her opinions and some of her experiences in this regard. So I'll read from that, and then I'll give you some of my own ideas. This article was posted at lionsroar.com. The title is The Maras of Privilege. And let's get into it. Are you studying the religion of wokeism or the religion of Buddhism? Perverting the Dharma with identity politics. Keep playing the victim. Sheer nonsense. This is some of the blowback I've got from my work challenging racism and promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in Buddhism. While much of the response to my research has been positive, it's also been the target of defensiveness and derision from some white Buddhists and resentment and rage from others. I've been attacked personally and accused of being a pseudo-scholar and of attempting to pervert the Dharma by means of identity politics. Self-identified alt-right Buddhists, yes, there is such a thing, have gone as far as creating a podcast ridiculing me and two other Buddhist studies scholars for our work on racial justice in American Buddhism. The white backlash against my scholarship on racial justice echoes many of the responses that Buddhists of color encounter when they attempt to make their communities more inclusive. Buddhists of color who are pioneering racial justice initiatives report that some white Buddhists denied that racism existed in American Buddhism and told them they were imagining racial harm and exclusion. Others declared that Buddhists of color were not real Buddhists and accused them of being too angry and trying to divide the Sangha. In other words, as feminist Sarah Ahmed explains, racism and white privilege aren't the problem. It's the people who name racism and white privilege who are the problem. For me, the experience of being at the receiving end of white resentment and rage has only strengthened my connection with Buddhists of color and empathy for what they experience and deepened my commitment to anti-racist work as an essential part of both my scholarship and Buddhist practice. So that's roughly the first half of the article. Just in the name of time, I won't read the whole thing, but again, if you would like to, which I highly recommend you do, it's well written. It's The Maras of Privilege by Anne Gleig, and it's posted at lionsroar.com. So what I would like to tackle today during Dharma Sunday is, do discussions around race and politics belong in Buddhist Sanghas? Should we even discuss these things? Are they pertinent to our practice at all? And this is a fair question. This is a question that has gone on for as long as Buddhism has been around. If we look at the caste system of India, if we look at the role of women in Buddhist communities, there's some real questions there. So the way I approach this first, as I approach everything, is by looking at the sutras and the doctrine. What does the doctrine tell us? And what I looked at primarily was the work of Vasubandhu and the 30 verses, which he wrote. Vasubandhu was a promulgator of the Yogacara school of Buddhism, which is extremely influential. In Mahayana Buddhism, it's sometimes known as the mind-only or the consciousness-only school of Buddhism. And I've talked a lot about Vasubandhu's teachings in the past, especially in a video I did called The Existence of Buddhist Gods. So I won't go too deeply into them here, but they are pertinent on this discussion. So I'd like to chat about them a little bit. And in Yogacara Buddhism, what Vasubandhu did was he broke our existence into 8 streams of consciousness. And then I, just for my own edification, break those down into 3 groups. So we have the physical group, which is sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell consciousness, also known as the 5 senses. We also have the mental streams of consciousness, which are thought and manas. Manas being the illusion of a self. And then finally, we have the spiritual stream of consciousness, which is the storehouse consciousness or the Dharmakaya. And what Vasubandhu put forward was that our existence in this world, unlike the Western view, which is that I exist here as a separate entity and I'm looking out, experiencing the world, Vasubandhu said that these 8 streams of consciousness rather come together to create us, to create the illusion of a separate self. So sight comes here, and hearing comes here, and smell comes here, and it all comes together. And at some point, there's a mental transformation where I, Alex, appear. Okay? So from the Buddhist standpoint, I and all of existence am what's called ontologically plural, which sounds fancy, but it's simply a philosophical term, which means that I exist in 2 forms. I exist, I'm here, I'm talking to you right now, and I also don't exist, meaning that there's no permanently separate abiding self that is Alex. If you chop me up into little pieces, there's no thing that is the true Alex. It's all of these different streams of consciousness coming together. And this is true of all of existence. It's all just streams of consciousness coming together and breaking apart. Which is why in Vasubandhu's 17th verse, he states the transformation of consciousness is conceptualization. What is conceptualized does not exist, thus everything is projection only. And that quote comes from inside Vasubandhu's Yogacara, a practitioner's guide, which is written by Ben Connolly. He does a very good job of explaining Vasubandhu's 30 verses. So if you'd like to learn more about them, I cannot recommend his book highly enough. So not only are we in Buddhism ontologically plural, we believe that things both exist and do not exist simultaneously. We are also ontological anti-realist, meaning that we believe nothing in the conceptual world has an existence of its own. None of it's real. It's all just mental projections, mental transformations created by consciousness coming together and breaking apart. So, what do we do with that information if everything is an illusion? Well, there's 2 possible responses. The first is nihilism. Nothing's real, therefore nothing matters, right? This is the hedonist response. I'm just going to drink and smoke and do whatever feels good in the moment because none of it's real. It's the equivalent of what I used to experience when I was in my philosophy program doing my undergrad. And, some freshmen would come in and say, we're all going to die anyway. We're all just a bunch of insects on a rock. Who cares? And that's one way to look at it, but that's not what we do in Buddhism. What we do in Buddhism is because nothing is real in and of itself, we treat everything as if it's real. So either nothing matters or everything matters. And in Buddhism, we take the view that everything matters. Because if we understand emptiness, then compassion naturally comes from that. Because if I understand that my existence is unreal and your existence is unreal, then my existence isn't separate from your existence. So in the same way that I take care of my hands because I see them as part of myself, I take care of you because I see you as part of myself. We're all in this together. This is why the first line of the Heart Sutra says, Avalokitesvara Bodhisattva of compassion, when observing the prajna paramita, sees the five skandhas are empty and is freed from suffering and despair. Now, Avalokitesvara, also known as Kannan, is the Bodhisattva of compassion. And what we are being told in the first line of the Heart Sutra is that it's because of her understanding of emptiness that Kanan's compassion appears. Because she understands that our world is not real, that it's all mental transformations, as Vasubandhu explains to us. That's where her compassion comes from. Because she understands that, one, we're all in this together, and two, she understands that we're all suffering needlessly. I would use the example of a child who is crying because they believe that there's a monster under their bed. Now we can take the nihilist approach and say, well, we know there's no monster, none of this matters, so screw that kid, let him cry it out. Or we can take the compassionate approach of, this child is suffering needlessly, let me go and help them, right? And then maybe we do what my parents used to do when I was a kid, meaning, we look under the bed, is there a monster there? We look in the closet, is there a monster there? Okay. We scared away the monsters. You're safe. You can go to bed now. We can also think of our illusory world as a crappy apartment, right? So we know this apartment sucks. We know that the water has a weird color, that our next door neighbors are loud, but this is an apartment we have to live in, right? We're stuck here. Maybe we don't have enough money to move. Maybe it's a nice location. Even if it is crappy, who knows? So do we suffer needlessly in this crappy apartment, or do we try to make it as good as we can? Do we maybe slap some paint on the walls? Do we get a filter for the sink so the water isn't that funny color? Maybe get ourselves some noise-canceling headphones so that we don't hear our neighbors. Again, we understand it's a bad apartment. We don't have any illusions about that, but we try to make it as good as we can because we're stuck here. And that's what we do in Buddhism. We understand that this world is an illusion, but it's an illusion we live in. We can't go anywhere else. So we use our Buddhist practice not to escape the world, but rather to make the world as good as we can for us and for others, to end sorrow and suffering for ourselves and others. And this is a goal that goes all the way back to the Buddha. When he sat under the Bodhi tree, he sat down with the goal that even if the flesh melts from my bones, he said, I will not move from this spot until I have found a way to end suffering for myself and others, for all sentient beings. So, what does this have to do with politics? Well, if we understand that everything is an illusion, including our own Buddhist practice, then it's not really correct to say, well, this thing is Buddhism and this thing is not Buddhism. Now, we do have the institutional practice of Buddhism. We have the expedient means that are talked about in the Nirvana Sutra, where we're told that all beings have Buddha nature, but we have defilements, and it's through the use of expedient means that we clean away those defilements so that we can see our Buddha nature and attain Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, which is the realization of our full enlightened selves. So the question then becomes, is this thing real? Is this thing not real? All of it's not real, but how do we deal with these unreal things, these illusions, skillfully so that we can remove our defilements, so that we can see our Buddha nature? I'd compare it to creating a sandcastle at the beach, right? So if we create a sandcastle out of sand over here, and we create a car out of sand over here, Well, the sandcastle is made out of sand and the car is made out of sand. So it's not really correct to say, well, the sandcastle is Buddhism, but the car is not Buddhism. I'm mixing metaphors, but I think you get the idea. Both the objects are made out of sand, so they are both equally valuable and unvaluable. When we talk about things that are politics and things that are not politics, they are both made from mental transformations. Therefore, they are both similarly illusions and they are both real. Therefore, they are both equally part of our spiritual practice, whether we want them to be or not. And this is a realization I had to come to because I wanted that real, pure Buddhism that was separate from the rest of the world. But it doesn't exist. Even if we look at the patriarchs and the matriarchs who existed before us, the Buddha had benefactors who supported his practice. So maybe he wasn't involved personally in the politics of the time, but his benefactors certainly were. Buddhism only survived in Japan because of the work of Prince Shutoku, I believe his name was. We have King Ashoka, who was a big believer in Buddhism. He was an emperor and he spread the practice, etc. So we can't say that Buddhism is separate from politics when the fact is Buddhism has benefited from politics in the past. And none of us would be practicing Buddhism if it weren't for that relationship between Buddhism and the political world. So if we accept that politics is one of many illusions that exist in the world, the question then becomes, well, how do we deal with that illusion? And in Buddhism, we deal with our illusions in one of three ways. We examine them and we do one of three things. We renounce them, meaning they're so harmful that we just can't interact with them at all. We realize that they're actually very beneficial to our practice and to our removing of our defilements, so we accept them wholeheartedly. Or we see that, okay, this isn't something that's either good or bad. It's neutral, and I really can't get away from it. Renunciation isn't a possibility, but full absorption isn't a possibility either, so I just need to work with it skillfully. The first examples of this would be food, medicine, clothing, and shelter. These were the four things that Buddha said we should not renounce, we should just deal with them skillfully. They're illusions, they're mental transformations, but out of compassion for ourselves and others, we don't renounce them, we work with them skillfully. And in the example of politics, while I think it would be nice, in the example of race, while I think it would be nice if we could renounce these things and not make them part of our practice, the fact is these items are inescapable. It doesn't matter how long I sit on the cushion and practice Buddhism, I will always be a black man, which means my race will always be part of my practice. It's an illusion, but it's an illusion I have to work with skillfully. As long as we live in the world, we will have to deal with politics, just like the Buddhists that came before us. It's inescapable. So since we can't escape politics, the only thing that's left then is working with it skillfully, because there is a real danger here. So I understand when Buddhists say that they don't want politics to be part of the practice, because politics can become almost a religion in and of itself. And people get so involved with it that they act unskillfully. We saw this on January 6th. I live in a city that experienced a lot of looting and rioting as a result of politics. And the whole city was placed on curfew, and it wasn't fun. So I get the danger of politics. I get why we might want to not have politics be part of our practice, but it has to be, because it's inescapable. So the question then shouldn't be how do we exclude the political from our Sanghas, but how do we work it into our Sanghas in a skillful manner. And I'm not an expert in this field, but I do have some ideas. I try Though if anyone who's been reading my blog, The Same Old Zen, or if you've watched my videos, you probably have an idea of what my political leanings are. That said, I don't believe it's my role as a Buddhist teacher to tell you who to vote for, or hey, sign this petition. Because I do feel very strongly that everyone should be welcome in the Sangha. However, morality is a big part of this practice. So it is my job to talk about morality and to live in the world in a moral way. So I believe that if we're going to have politics be part of our sanghas, be part of our practice, some of the really effective ways we can do that is through direct action. So not so much talking about political mumbo jumbo and what the tax rate should be or who to vote for, but rather how can we use political machines, if you will, to help the people who are suffering? Because again, Buddhism is all about the alleviation of suffering. And there's a couple ways we can do this. There's a couple of organizations that I've seen that I think do a good job of this. One of them is the Buddhist Zuchi organization, tzuchi.us. It's an NGO out of Korea, I believe. I could be wrong about that. That provides aid and disaster relief all over the world. Another organization is foodnotbombs.net, which is not a Buddhist organization, but it's an organization I've worked with in the past, and it's really terrific. And what they do is they simply feed people. No questions asked. They prepare food, they accept donations, they go out into the community, and they give food to whoever is hungry, whoever wants it. And I think that's great. Another would be Kurunaorg, which is an organization that works with Dalit families in India. The Dalits are seen as untouchable. In India, they're at the bottom of the caste system, and they are horribly, horribly mistreated. So I think those are some ways that if we're wanting to integrate politics into our Buddhist practice, we can do that with organizations like what I mentioned before. I think discussions around race and around politics do belong in our sanghas because, like I said, they're inescapable. I personally have been told by a Zen teacher in the past that, oh, I just don't think minorities aren't that interested in practicing Zen. So that's an experience I had to work with. That's a conversation I had. So to say that race doesn't belong in the Sangha when I had that conversation with another Buddhist teacher, well, I can't make that connection. And I would argue, well, maybe minorities aren't as interested in practicing Zen because Zen teachers say things like, minorities aren't interested in practicing Zen. And it's especially interesting because when we look at organizations like the Nichiren Shu, like SGI, like Pure Land Buddhism, they do an excellent job of integrating race and politics into their own sanghas and creating a community that's welcoming to everyone. So if we're looking for ideas on how we can make our own organizations more welcoming, maybe we can look at Pure Land Buddhist Churches of America. Maybe we can look at the Nichiren Shu. Maybe we can look at the SGI and mimic what they're doing. And I'm not really sure how to end this. I usually have, some sort of a closing statement, but I don't have one right now. Nothing's coming to mind. So I'll just end there. I do think these discussions belong in our sanghas for the reasons I gave. I think the work that people like Anne Gleig is doing is important. Even if we don't necessarily agree with her work, I think it's incorrect to attack her or others who are doing that work. Maybe we should just keep our eye on our own bowl. And I'll practice my way over here, and they'll practice their way over there, and we'll see what happens. Amitabha. So that's the talk for today. I hope it was helpful. If you'd like to subscribe and hit the notification bell, please make sure you do that. That way you'll be notified when I post talks in the future. If you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, that'd be great too. Just a few announcements. So this is Dharma Sunday. It happens every Sunday. It was happening at every Sunday at 6:30 p.m. I think from now on we'll be doing the broadcast at 7 p.m. just because of some scheduling conflicts I have here at the homestead. With there being less light, I have to do things before the talk that I used to do after the talk. So that extra half hour will be helpful. So moving forward, it will be produced at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here at this channel. We also do meditation and sutra study, which again happens every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's a little bit more involved. We do a 15-minute guided meditation. We do a reading from a sutra. And then we do a Dharma talk given by yours truly. So I hope you decide to join us for that. Until next time, Amitabha.